Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for staying tuned and welcome back to another deep dive at Front Page by AM Network. I'm Antara, and today we are essentially answering a question that is currently hanging over every boardroom, engineering floor, and earnings call across Indian IT. And the question is this: is artificial intelligence finally delinking revenue from headcount, or are we just watching classic cost-cutting rebrand itself as an AI revolution? Now, in the Q1 FY27 earnings, India's top five giants, TCS, Infosys, HCLTech, Wipro, and Tech Mahindra, generated a massive combined revenue of $25.6 billion. Now, across all five terms, dollar revenue per employee went up year over year. On the surface, the narrative sounds clean. Enterprise generative AI and agentic delivery tools are making engineers more productive, allowing IT majors to squeeze more value out of literally every billable hour. But when you sit and look beneath all the headline figures, the data paints a far more complicated picture. While TCS went on a hiring spree of over 9,000 employees, firms like HCLTech, Tech Mahindra, and Infosys continued to shed headcount. In fact, long-term CAGR data suggests productivity growth over a 7-year horizon. It remains remarkably flat. So joining me today to untangle the numbers, the narrative, and really getting the pulse and the reality on the ground is my colleague and AI tech journalist, Ajay. Ajay, welcome to the show. It's really good to have you here.
Thank you, Adra. It's a pleasure to be here always.
Our pleasure, always. Ajay, starting with the baseline data here, in Q1 FY27, dollar revenue per employee went up across all five IT majors, but the headcount strategy behind these particular numbers were divergent, to say the least. TCS added over 9,200 people, while HCL Tech shed more than 3,200. So, Ajay, just walk us through these very contrasting strategies and how are different companies achieving this per employee revenue uptick? Ajay.
Yeah, Adra, thank you for setting up the context. So as you rightly pointed out, it's a very distinct strategy between compared to each companies. From an ordinary man's perspective, like an investor perspective, the narrative is that like revenue per employee is up across all these IT companies, and that means that AI must be working, AI-led automation must be working somehow, especially from a talent perspective. But if you look closely, these are like different stories. Like when we start with TCS, it's the most counterintuitive one, because like everyone assumes rising revenue per employee means companies are cutting people. But when you look at TCS, they've added some 9,200 odd people to their workforce in the last quarter compared to like on a sequential basis. So that is giving them at least like 6% odd rise in revenue per employee, which is a very impressive one on the paper. But at the same time, if you look at from a year-on-year perspective, TCS total headcount is still more than 19,000 people below their headcount last year. So what I'm trying to say is that TCS revenue is growing faster than its workforce. How its workforce is getting rebuilt. So that is one story. And when you look at HCLTech, Infosys, they have taken the completely opposite route. Like they shrank their headcount sequentially, and still they saw their revenue per employee rising. And Wipro is sort of an outlier because they've also added some 888 people, and but they've only seen around 1% revenue growth, and their operating margin actually fell from 17.2% to 16%. So what I'm trying to say is that you cannot put all these eggs in the same basket, because all these companies have their own strategies. How they're doing it is very different. So I think each company should be studied specifically on this front.
All right. Ajay, Infosys, in fact, stated in their call that AI-led services now account for 8.2% of their revenue. Having said that, they trimmed their full-year constant currency growth guidance down to 1.5 to 3%. Now, if AI services are becoming a meaningful percentage of top-line revenue, why aren't overall growth forecasts reflecting that sort of momentum?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, Antara, because I remember this same question being asked in the last quarterly earnings call of the company, and the CEO Salil Parekh was addressing that. So basically, according to him, the reason for cutting the guidance 3.5% to 3% was because the macroeconomic conditions really does not come up with the same expectation of the company. And on your question on AI, that how like when AI as a part of revenue is growing this much, why the company is seeing a macroeconomic headwind? So the point is that 8.2% is still a minority slice of the business of a multi-billion dollar company like Infosys. Like we are not talking about the 90 plus odd percent of the business that the Infosys, the big revenue generators of the business is, we are not talking about that particular business. We are talking about the 8.2% here. So I think, like that traditional business, 90 plus odd percent business is still facing the softness, delayed discretionary spending, delay in client, approvals, and how clients are cutting the, what do you say, deal sizes and everything. So all these headwinds are still there for that company, as for all other IT companies as well. So when we are saying AI revenue is growing, it's mathematically too small to move the overall needle of a company of that significant scale like Infosys. So I remember talking to Sudhi also about this last time when we met. So
You
that's it.
know, Ajay, then you also have Wipro here, which
Yeah.
added 888 employees with revenue at $2.61 billion, bringing their quarterly revenue per employee to around $10,760. But their operating margin in IT services, it slipped to 16%. Now, CFO Aparna Iyer has in fact given a statement on this, noted that strategic investments are they are creating near-term margin volatility. So, what are those investments, and why is it that Wipro is taking a harder margin hit than the rest of its peers?
Yeah, that's actually interesting. So when you look at it, Wipro, there is a lot of narrative around Wipro, what is happening in Wipro, what's the AI, play that the company is going through. So my point is that it's very important to separate what we actually know about Wipro from the company, from their earnings call, and from the executives there, and what we are speculating, right? So what we know for certain is that Wipro's operating margin in the IT services business slipped, and we all know, from 17.2% to 16%, as you pointed out. And on the earnings call, CFO Aparna Iyer specifically mentioned that the company is continuing to invest in people and strategic priority areas. I mean, like, she also addressed that will actually create a near-term margin volatility in the company, and they're okay with it because they want to build a stronger foundation for the future growth of the company. So if you ask me what are the strategic priorities area, I mean, according to me, it could be like AI infrastructure investments that all these IT companies are making right now, or like upskilling programs where they're upskilling their own current employees, and they're also looking at lateral hiring, things like that, because they need more people to do this. And we extensively spoke about forward deployed engineers and everything. So they need that kind of talent base also. So I think company like Wipro is actually investing in that bit. So it's very hard to give that, because Wipro is the only one of those companies whose revenue per employee gain is being paid for with margin, rather than coming from attrition or outsized revenue growth. So it's a very interesting company to look out for.
Absolutely, Ajay. Now let's also get into the core of the article. You cited data from Unearth Insight founder Gaurav Vasu, who made a crucial distinction, right? About 60% of this revenue per employee rise is driven by workforce rationalization and optimization, while only 40% comes from actual AI-driven efficiency gains. Ajay, if you could break down that 60-40 split for us, how much of today's AI productivity story is simply, just management running, I would say, leaner operations?
Yeah. I remember talking to the company Anand Insights Gaurav Vasu. So the company's estimate is that like roughly 60% of the revenue per employee improvement across the sector is coming from workforce rationalization, which is like leaner headcount and things like that, and only around 40% is coming from genuine AI-driven efficiency gains. I mean, like that is sort of fairly damning the AI changing the IT industry narrative, because we're still talking about the older way of cutting people just to get better margins and stuff like that. But there is a
Right.
nuance to it, because the 60-40 split that we're talking about, it can't be separated from each other. Let's say a meaningful chunk of that 60% rationalization exists because people companies understood that AI-led automation can reduce the need for that many people. So basically, it means that like earlier 10 people used to do one job, and now AI, 2 people can do that job. So 8 people are not required. So in a way, AI is also helping in workforce rationalization. So I'm saying that 60/40 cannot be treated as two different things, because
Okay.
AI is helping in this workforce rationalization, which is helping the company to overall reduction in headcount.
Understood.
Yeah.
Ajay, in your conversations across the industry, would you say that the enterprise clients are aware of this distinction when, when IT service firms pitch AI-driven delivery to their clients? Are buyers getting actual technical non-linearity, or are they just paying for, restructured offshore delivery teams?
No, the evidence suggests that the clients are very aware and they are not waiting for vendors to sort of classify, clarify this distinction. But I think companies are coming to a point where they are looking at more outcome based, pricing, so outcome based,
Right.
what do you say, like more outcomes basically. Like whatever services they're getting, they're looking more outcomes. So I don't think they're very much concerned about how many people and things like that. I think that's why the company is also going, and also the industry is also growing in that line, right? I mean, let's say the whole bench strength model is getting disrupted. So now it's like one task is one deal is being assigned, and then this deal is being getting done. Let's say this particular period with this many people. So they don't care about how many people are getting to do this job. So I think that's how the industry is growing. But I think it's too early to talk about it, because
Okay.
vendors, as you asked, the clients are very much aware of it.
Okay. Thank you for
Yeah.
that, Ajay. Okay. If we step back from this single quarter and look at the multi-year trend, the narrative, I would say, gets even more revealing because, the unearthed inside data in your report shows that the revenue per employee has only crept up gradually since pre-pandemic financial year 19. Now, over 7 years, Infosys grew per employee revenue at a CAGR of, I believe, 2.47%, TCS at 0.59%, then there was HCLTech at 0.45%, and Wipro actually saw a negative of minus 1.45%. Ajay, given how heavily the industry has marketed automation and cloud transformation and how Gen AI over these past 7 years, why are these multi-year compound growth rates still essentially flat, or I would say in low single digits? Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean that's a very interesting number for me also, because we keep talking about 1 quarter, 2 quarter, or 1 year, but 7 year data is something that is very startling number for me, because like as you pointed out, in Infosys grew revenue from like 2.47%, TCS 0.59, and all these numbers that you mentioned. That's 7 years. So that is the period that included the cloud migration wave, or the years of automation investment the companies have done, or now we're talking about the entire Gen AI moment that we are seeing through. So all through that, the actual compound productivity gain at the top of the industry is either flat or barely positive, or Wipro's case, it's outright negative. So the understanding is that like the analyst that I spoke to gave pointed to a utilization as a, what do you say, a major driver for all these things, like getting more billable hours out of existing employees, and reducing the bench time. So even today, some of what we are calling AI-driven productivity may still be the industry pulling its traditional utilization lever, just with better technology called AI. So I think in a long time frame, like 7 years, this is not creating a lot of what do you like meaningful impact.
Okay, all right. Ajay, Praveen Bhadara from New Way Global noted in your piece that the last 8 quarters were primarily focused on, improving utilization, but the industry is now trying to bring in, true non-linearity. What does true non-linear growth look like in an industry which is historically built on, selling billable hours and body shopping? Would you say that it's even possible without fundamentally changing the business model in itself?
Yeah, I feel like that's the $1 million question. Even the industry is also asking for a very long time right now. No, I mean, Antara, I would like to say that like the simplest way to think about non-linear growth is like revenue growing without headcount growing at the same rate. I think that's the most accessible definition for that, and that's the biggest break industry has been looking, right? I mean, IT services had a pretty close relation between people and revenue. Like more, like we mentioned earlier in the earlier part of the conversation, like more people means more projects, and more projects means more revenue. Like when you look at IT services companies for quite some time, for decades actually, they always associated the revenue with people, which means more deals mean more revenue, which is like translated to more people being hired and being put in projects. So I think that's the norm. That was a norm for a very long time. I think that is significantly changing right now with all these outcome-based pricing and new pricing strategies being introduced into the system. So I think IT services companies are not yet really ready to embrace that, but I think they are sort of forced to do that, and I think that's going to be the norm going forward. And specifically about Praveen Badada, in my conversation with him also, we spoke about this. I feel like he is expecting profit per person to become a more important metric. But exactly what replaces the traditional billing model is still an open question. How companies are going to do this, and all these things are there, but I think it's too early to talk about it.
Okay, all right. Let me also bring this back to the developers and system architects and tech leads who read AIM every day, who tune into front page every day. If 60% of this productivity push is workforce rationalization and 40% is AI delivery, what does this environment really mean for the daily work life and job security of software engineers in Indian IT?
Yeah, I mean that's a very interesting. This is a light cut in my place, but so what I'm trying to say is that it's very hard for all these employees also, because like when you look at the macro tension, there is a bullish market-facing narrative that all these net headcount reduction is happening in all these companies. And let's say if you're an engineer, you're working in one company, and the next day a few people in our company are getting laid off and all these things. So it's very hard to give an answer, but I would feel that there's a broader tension here, that on one side companies are talking about AI driven productivity and how they're improving their workforce and everything. On the other hand, several of them are operating with smaller teams, like we spoke about TCS for that matter. Like sequentially they have grown, but on an annual basis they have reduced employees, and that is the norm going forward. Because let's say, I hope you remember last time during TCS AGM, I think the chairman was talking about the same, that they're expecting to have same number of AA agents and same number of employees going forward. TCS as a company, which is the largest employer in the country. So if the chairman of that company is feeling that they'll have similar number of AA agents and human employees, that's a big sign that either engineers have to upskill themselves and do whatever they can to be to stay relevant, rather than being cannibalized by AI.
Makes sense, Ajay.
Yeah.
Ajay, looking ahead through the rest of FY27, what is that single key metric or a signal that you will be sort of tracking to determine whether Indian IT is genuinely transforming, or is it just navigating another lean economic cycle?
Yeah, like I mentioned, profit per employee is something that I will actually look for, because revenue per employee can go up simply because you reduce headcount, which is something that the companies have been doing very, very long time now. Like we saw that with HCLTech Infosys, because they reduced their headcount and they've seen a improvement in the revenue per employee. But profit per employee harder to sort of make, because if margin under pressure, they can't they can't just reduce employees and then get a better revenue per employee. So what I'm watching through FY27 is whether companies can increase their revenue per employee while keeping margins stable or improving them, which Wipro couldn't do, I think, unfortunately, in this last quarter.
Right.
So yeah, we're starting to see that, and other than Wipro, almost all other companies have done that. They have improved their profits. I mean, though not in a great scale, but they have at least managed to do it. So I think if the companies are able to maintain that trend, I think it's great.
Okay, all right. Ajay, thank you so much. In the interest of time, again, I'll have to wrap the segment, but this has been an incredibly educational conversation, I would say. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the end of today's deep dive. The Q1 financial year 27 numbers make one thing very clear. Indian IT's revenue per employee is rising, but we are very much still in the transitional phase where workforce optimization leads the charge, and AI-driven non-linearity is only beginning to show its hand. So a big thank you to Ajay Rag for breaking down his reporting and really getting into the nitty-gritties of the numbers with us today. And you can read, ladies and gentlemen, you can read Ajay's full article and detailed data breakdown over at Analytics India magazine. And to everybody, to our audience of developers and architects and engineering leaders and anybody who has tuned in and watching the segment right now, are your teams experiencing genuine AI-driven productivity leaps? Or are you simply feeling the pressure of leaner team structures? This is a question that I would like to leave you with. Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below or reach out to us directly. Do not forget to like, share and subscribe and hit the notification bell for more AIM update. I'm Antara. This is Front Page by AM Network and we'll see you again soon.